So our third presenter of the plenary session is Tammy Wagner, and she's a regional crossing manager from Federal Railroad Administration. Tammy has been employed by the FRA for 12 years and serves as regional crossing and trespasser manager. Tammy maintains a close working relationship with railroads, state, local, and federal agencies to ensure safety compliance and implement safety programs aimed at reducing collisions, injuries, and fatalities on or near railroad property. Tammy serves as the point person for FRA's Region 4 Quiet Zone projects. She attends community meetings, participates in Quiet Zone diagnostic crossing reviews throughout Minnesota, Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, and Michigan. She has 25 years of experience in the field of occupational and traffic safety, and she currently serves as an Operation Lifesaver regional trainer and has been an Operation Lifesaver presenter for 20 years, conducting grade crossing safety and trespass prevention presentations to all age groups. So thank you very much. Welcome, Tammy, to the Michigan Rail Conference. This one moves it forward. Right.
Good morning and welcome. Thank you for inviting the FRA, Federal Railroad Administration, to participate in the Michigan Rail Conference. As Posse indicated, I serve as the Regional Crossing Trespass Prevention Manager. So I deal a lot with the public safety, community outreach, complaints, making railroad crossings safer, an accident investigation, and a whole litany of things that our investigators are not involved with. So if you have any questions or concerns regarding your communities, please let me know. And of course, the FRA and statistics, we have a wealth of information on our website. How we focus our community outreach efforts is based upon our statistics, where they occur, and how can we further reduce these numbers. Now, the numbers that you see in front of you there are for January through May 2012. FRA is usually about 3 months behind on our record-keeping statistic data. But we take a look at where they occur, and as you can see here, trespasser incidents are on the rise. A lot of the public residential folks don't realize that railroad property is private property. They take shortcuts to get to school, home, work, what have you. So there's never a time that goes by when we're out doing inspections and it seems you always have to chase someone off railroad property. Simply do a little education and let them know that the only appropriate and legal place to cross the railroad tracks is pedestrian crossings, crosswalks, what have you. But it's certainly impossible to fence the entire railroad right-of-ways, is what some communities think that the railroads and FRA should do. But as you can see, the trespasser incidents are increasing. Our highway rail fatalities are on the decline. So hopefully through our educational and our public safety outreach efforts, that does have an impact. But again, we're really getting the message out there about trespassing on railroad properties and hope to combat some of those incidents. I was asked to talk a little bit about Michigan statistics, and you can see there's like a 93% reduction in the past 30 years as far as Michigan highway rail statistics. And Michigan is primarily, on the decline, but in some cases you can see trespasser versus highway rail grade crossings. We still do have a problem in those areas. Another thing that we focus on with the FRA is what type of motorists are involved in our highway rail grade crossing incidents. And, we used to focus on bus drivers, and now we take a look at the numbers in our truck drivers. Professional truck drivers are the folks that fail to, comply with the laws, have inappropriate behaviors, and make some of those bad mistakes through their daily driving or daily transportation mode. So this just kind of shows where we are as far as the past 4 years, or past 5 years, I should say, or 2009 to 2012. And again, these are numbers from January through May for 2012. Pedestrian incidents, these are people that get struck at the highway rail grade crossing. Again, not paying attention, complacent. We see a lot of folks with the iPods, the earbuds, and just walking across the railroad tracks don't even see or hear that train coming in their direction. Where collisions occur, a lot of us that work in the rail industry, the state DOTs or other safety partners spend hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars on active warning devices, the lights and the gates. As you can see from our statistics, for 2010 to 2012, roughly 56% of our incidents occur at crossings where we have the lights and the gates. So we take a look at what other options do these folks have to not circumvent the gates, and some of the state DOTs or communities are installing the non-traversable concrete medians down the center of the roadway, channelization devices to hopefully prevent further tragedies. So, hopefully we'll see a decrease in these numbers over the next couple of years. But again, it takes funding. Somebody has to do a review of the crossing and determine, is the roadway wide enough to install the non-traversable curb? A lot of logistics there. I'm active with the Operation Lifesaver program, and this is one of our national partnerships where we educate folks of all ages about trespassing and highway road grade crossing safety. This is a billboard campaign that was introduced this summer with the Union Pacific and Operation Lifesaver. The billboards are up in some of our high-profile areas, Minnesota, and basically Nebraska, Iowa, where Union Pacific runs. And I know Sam Kroll, who is your Operation Lifesaver coordinator here in Michigan, has done a similar campaign in Michigan. So what minimal dollars the Operation Lifesaver programs have in each state, we certainly do try to educate folks about railroad safety. As far as FRA, we have various publications available, and some of the newer ones that we were required to introduce as part of the Rail Safety Improvement Act of 2008, we're taking a look at pedestrian safety. So I encourage you to go to our website, review some of these documents, and take a look at what the folks at FRA are preparing. Pedestrian safety at passenger stations. In the Chicago area, we've got the Metro commuter stations, and we see an increase of folks just ignoring the warning signs, fail to comply, and stay back beyond the platform areas. So this is a national report. The next one is talking about strategies to prevent trespassing. And I can't dwell enough on trespass prevention. It's something that we all need to take to heart, do some education, and let folks know that this is an increasing problem throughout our nation. So 2 reports. And the last one is sight distance. Anytime we have a passive crossing where an incident occurs, FRA, the incident meets the FRA threshold, we are required to go out there and do a site evaluation to determine if we have any issues with curvature of the track, site obstructions such as buildings or trees. So this is a new publication that's available on our website. And then trespass prevention for trespassing safety for ATV folks. I did bring some of those with, so I will put those out at the table as well. But just a safety fact sheet for ATV operators. Works well with snowmobile folks up here in Michigan too. The FRA website, as part of the federal or the Rail Safety Improvement Act, we were required to put an online complaint bar on our website. So that has been heavily used, not positive in my regard, because we receive a lot of complaints about train horns, especially now in the summertime, block crossings, unsafe crossings, site issues, rough crossings. So the general public now has the ability to just go online and file their complaint. Of course, FRA does have to follow up on all of those complaints. So of course that takes manpower, additional resources from our staff. Talk a little bit about the new ENS, Emergency Notification System regulation that just came out. Again, this is what the sign looks like. If you're not familiar with this, again, part of the Rail Safety Improvement Act, we were required to install some type of signage that alerts the motorist of any unsafe situation. This is who you contact. So again, some of our Class 1 railroads have done a phenomenal job of installing the signage before the required deadline. And I just thought I'd show you some photos of what the sign actually looks like and where it should be positioned. On passive crossings, we want it attached to the crossbuck. or active crossings on the signal mast. So some little history there. Federal Register was published, or the ENS was published June 2012. Requires railroads to install the new ENS sign on all passive, active, pedestrian pathway crossings. If you have a rail yard into a facility, you only need to place the sign at one position, so it's visible in both directions. So, oops, at the bottom there, very important. Make sure it's the operating railroad where you have the number attached to the signage. Why this is a mandate is obviously because we have some unsafe situations that do occur at railroad crossings. So anytime you have the active warning devices malfunctioning, you've got a vehicle or a lowboy trailer hung up on the tracks, we want to make sure that folks are aware of those situations. Site obstructions is another issue. But again, whatever the motorist or the pedestrian deems as unsafe, that is why the signage is now required. In the past, you used to see the black and white or a variation of colors on the signal bungalow or a smaller bumper sticker on the signal mast. That no longer complies. Okay, again, just the unsafe reporting. The sign actually, there was a lot of movement, a lot of comments from the railroads regarding the size of the sign, the color of the sign, the letter size. So obviously this was a rulemaking process that took a lot longer. Minimum size of the sign is 12 by 9. Lettering must be at least 1 inch in height. Blue background, white lettering. There are some deadlines that the railroads do have to meet. If the railroad currently has nothing in place as far as ENS, emergency response information, that must be in place by September 1, 2015. If the railroad non-conforming, we'll get into the signage sign and all that as well. If they have no 1-800 or if a short line has no resource available at this time, they must comply by March 1, 2014. Other dates as far as the signage, if the railroad currently has the sign 60 inches in circumference and the lettering is at least 3/4 inch in height, as long as the actual sign is visible in the proper locations, it will remain in place until the lifespan of that particular sign. If we have issues regarding less than 3/4 inch in size for the lettering, September 1st, 2017 is the deadline where those signs must be replaced. So we get on to, if it's less than 60 inches, must comply by September 1st, 2015. So just some deadlines. Placement of the sign. If you don't have it on the signal mast, maybe, for instance, you currently, the railroad has the signage on the bungalow, or as I mentioned earlier, the bumper stickers, September 1st, 2017 is the ultimate deadline to have that in place. Record keeping, another very important date. If a railroad currently has nothing in place today, no record keeping policy, September 1st, 2013 is the deadline for that. So I just want to mention this, reinforce the ENS regulation is rapidly approaching and railroads must comply with that. Another item is the new app that's available for iPhones. Unfortunately, it's not available for Droids at this point in time. Basically an app that FRA produced where you can download a variety of information if you're trying to search for a railroad crossing. And many of us go out into the fields and you can't find the crossing. You download the app, you have the ability to research where you are, take a look, private, public crossing. The app actually has the ability for you to view the crossing inventory, which railroad, private, public, just a litany of information that would be helpful when you're out in the field. It also does have the ability to send a response back to FRA to our complaint online format where the individual can say, well, we've got brush or a building or a visual obstruction. And this is kind of what it looks like. Private, pedestrian, public crossings are all noted within whatever area you plug into the app. So that came out about the end of May and it's available. If any of you have questions on that, I can give you the web link. I was asked to talk a little bit about Quiet Zone. quiet zones, I should say. That is about the bulk of the work that I do with the Federal Railroad Administration. The regulation came out 2006. It allows communities to establish quiet zones. Fortunately, in Michigan, we only have 5. Yay! I'll go through some of our numbers here, but nationwide, 562 quiet zones throughout the United States. The bulk of the quiet zones happen to be in my region, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, or not, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. Wisconsin had the bulk of them up until a couple of months ago, where Texas increased the number of quiet zones. And we actually thought that this would reduce over time. We wouldn't have as many inquiries for quiet zones, but it's just the opposite. A day does not go by where I have a community call and say, tell us about how we can implement a quiet zone. And right now it's an ultimate goal for a lot of these communities because of the summer months. People want to sit outside and not listen to train horns. And of course, train traffic has increased as well. So, but these are some numbers as to where we are with quiet zones in the United States. As I mentioned earlier, the regulation allows communities to silence the locomotive horns. The drawback is there are some costs involved, and a lot of the residents that call and complain about horns or train horns and how to implement a quiet zone just think they can write a letter to FRA. It's not that simple. Obviously, we want to make sure there's lights and gates and constant warning time, power out indicators. There's a risk assessment that is completed. In some cases, the communities actually have to hire a contractor. I try to help out as much as possible, give the updates to the communities, let them know what the regulation pertains, and but it can be intense. There's no question about that. Just kind of talk a little bit about, excuse me. We do hold diagnostic reviews to look at all the crossings, do an assessment to determine what there exists today as far as lights and gates or constant warning time, and what other issues we have with nearby intersections, commercial driveways, any unsafe practices. The regulation clearly states that a diagnostic review is only required when we have private crossings or pedestrian crossings. We take that one step forward in our region, and we do a diagnostic review for every quiet zone. Primarily because we've had some issues in the past with the unknown and people or communities not understanding the regulation and what has to transpire. And you get the DOT, the railroad, the community, in some cases the county, the township on board. We're all looking at the railroad crossings, and we all have an understanding of any unsafe situations. General public does not understand why train horns have to sound or how often they sound. The regulation states 15 to 20 seconds prior to the approach of any public crossing. As far as private crossings, the FRA does not regulate private crossings, and that's where we do the diagnostic assessment. In some cases, railroads don't sound for private crossings, but that's between the community, the railroad, or the private landowner. Should go back here. A lot of individuals who live close to railroad crossings don't understand that when we say, excuse me, it sounds for every public crossing, that means if you've got block after block after block, that train is going to sound for every crossing. So I get a lot of complaints about that. Why does it have to sound for every crossing within the community? It's federal regulations. We certainly take a look at crossing closures when we're out there doing some field reviews. You certainly, in my opinion, you don't need a crossing every block within a community. There are various notices that have to be submitted to the FRA, basically proposing the quiet zone, and then essentially the final notice is saying, all right, safety improvements are completed, horns cease in 21 days. There are some steps in the middle of that may take a lot longer. This is let me just tell you here, this is the FRA has a calculator. It's called the Quiet Zone Calculator. Allows communities to pick and choose the crossings for their quiet zone, and it spits out their risk assessment. The risk is based on the number of trains, the vehicle speed, the number of vehicles over the crossing, potential of an incident happening at that particular crossing, and then we look at the crossing history of accidents over the past 5 years. So this formula and this information is what we need to assess the quiet zone and determine what other safety measures are required to achieve a quiet zone. Quiet zone has to be at least a half a mile in length. So I receive a lot of calls from residents that say, we only wanted silent horns at Main Street. Well, that's not how it works. We do have some effectiveness or risk reduction rates for supplemental safety measures. I'll just show you some pictures of those. Worked on a project in Fargo, North Dakota that took 10 years to complete. A total of 21 crossings in that particular, it was a main line and then a spur track that ran through Fargo, North Dakota and Moorhead, Minnesota. But they obviously did the utmost as far as safety. 4 quad gates, pedestrian gates, and I want to say the final price was $6.4 million, but it took quite a while to get the funding together, get the partners on board, and then the actual implementation of the safety devices. Channelization, another item that is available for the risk reduction, but in the Midwest where we have to deal with snow and snowplow operators, it's not the best thing to put on the roadway surface. Anytime we have a paddle broke or a chunk of the pavement or the base missing that would be termed a non-compliant quiet zone, the horns can obviously, train horns can be sounded under that restriction. Wayside horn, I don't think we have any of these in Michigan. Do we, Sam? It's basically a stationary horn positioned at the crossing, and it's a one-to-one replacement for the locomotive horn. It's not really popular because you still have the horn noise sounding. Communities that wish to install this for a quiet zone have to have the lights and gates. Alternative safety measures, we're always looking for new technology. However, all of that has to meet the fail-safe practices. But anytime someone has a new idea for as far as safety or IT projects for railroad crossings, we certainly take a look at that, entertain, and we have our RDV folks take a look at that. Some of the things, we certainly do go out and monitor quiet zones. Let me tell you, there's some fun stuff out there. Anytime a community installs channelization, it's just common practice that we take a look to make sure that it is properly maintained. It's a cheap fix for a quiet zone, but it could be your worst nightmare under our Midwest winter conditions. Obviously, safety can be enhanced whenever a quiet zone is introduced. Communities are not required to install safety measures at every crossing, the riskiest ones that will get them to an acceptable risk level. As I'd mentioned, we take a look at crossing closures, which is why we bring the railroad on board, community officials, and we do review each of the crossings. When we talk about the concrete non-traversable curb medians, we say 6 inches tall, starting at the lower gate arm. And again, if it's not 6 inches tall, we'll certainly make it, obviously go out there and reinstall. And you don't mean to be the bad person that's got to give negative news, but the regulation states 100 feet or 60 feet, 6 inches tall, and that's certainly what we mean. A lot of communities or residents think that once they establish a quiet zone, it's there forever. Not true. The train crews do have the ability to sound the locomotive horn whenever there is an unsafe situation. Kids on the railroad tracks, a vehicle stalled, animals out there, what have you. But, there is some leverage for the crews to sound those locomotive horns. Some of the railroads do install additional signage for the crews when they're entering a quiet zone area and when they're exiting, not part of the regulation. I'm not going to dwell heavily. Anytime a quiet zone is implemented and they can't meet the supplemental safety measures, there's another option for alternative safety measures, and that goes into another paperwork nightmare. Horns may sound, again, I talked earlier, anytime we have roadway workers out there, unsafe situations. And in some practices where we implemented quiet zones early on when the regulation came out, communities wouldn't implement a quiet zone on one rail corridor, possibly the main line, but they'd forget about the spur track. And it can be very troublesome when you're out there trying to determine, well, where are the horns coming from? So that's when you have to do some on-site reviews as well. And part of the signage that's required is the no train horn sign, and that just tells the motoring public quiet zone is in place at that time. Anytime we have a private crossing within a quiet zone, we certainly take that serious, and it can't be within a quarter mile from the nearest public crossing. Quiet zones within a private crossings within a quiet zone have to have the stop sign, the crossbuck, and the no train horn sign. Now, a lot of folks think that a quiet zone is there forever. We do require updates. If a community implements safety measures at every public crossing, it's a 4.5 to 5 year review. If they choose to implement safety measures at maybe the riskiest crossings with the heaviest traffic volume, it's a 2.5 to 3 year review. And basically, we want to make sure that the safety measures are in place. We still have the concrete curb medians, the channelization. Nothing has been taken out, and nothing has been altered within that quiet zone. So again, they just send a letter to FRA and the safety partners indicating everything is still compliant. But that's our way of basically saying, you know, we are watching out for quiet zones, and we want to make it safe for the motoring public. Some communities meet the national risk reduction threshold, and that is calculated annually, and that is soon to be announced on the FRA website in the Federal Register as well. It's called the NSRT, and that's just another mode for quiet zones to be implemented, but it's, again, an annual review. And I'm not going to go into that in great detail. We do have the ability to terminate quiet zones. Our agency does. And basically, if we've got an incident that has occurred, or if we have communities that have not followed through with the quiet zone, basically they would receive a letter from FRA stating that the quiet zone is no longer compliant. And within 6 months, the community has the ability to say, well, we're going to install whatever safety device to make it compliant again. They actually have 2.5 to 3 years to make that improvement. And that's part of the controversy with the railroads, is we know it's an unsafe situation, but we're allowing it to go on for 2.5 to 3 years. Back in the end of June of this year, we actually terminated 3 quiet zones in Wisconsin due to noncompliance, not following through, not meeting our pre-roll quiet zone deadline, and the litany of other things. So if you want to make friends, terminate a quiet zone. Everybody knows your name in the community, but it's not fun, and it's not something that, you know, I'm certainly not proud of that, but you have to work with the community to get it reestablished. All right, that's all that I have, and I appreciate your attendance and participation. Any questions?
Do we have any questions?
Here's the info.
Ms. Wagner, I have a question about the terrible accident in Lac-Mégantic, Quebec on July 5th. I realize that's not U.S. territory, but it was a U.S.-owned railroad. The press accounts that I've read were not clear in describing what happened. Apparently, while the train was parked, fire broke out on the locomotive, and the local fire department went there to extinguish it. The media accounts have not made clear whether the local public safety authorities had an 800 number to call at the railroad. How soon were they in contact with the railroad management? And was there anybody on duty at the MMA who could tell them either stay off that locomotive or let us know where it is so we can get somebody out there to secure that train? The media do not cover railroad technology very well, as you know, and it's never been made clear what the sequence of events was, and whether those public safety authorities were in contact with the railroad early.
I hate to answer it in this fashion, but unfortunately that is going through the litigation process. Our FRA, NTSB is going through the investigation as well. I'm not at liberty to talk about that at all, and I'm very sorry for that response.
We need a lounge chair.
On quiet zones, is there any evidence that implementation of quiet zones has resulted in increased accidents or had any effect at all on grade crossing accidents?
We're seeing positive results from quiet zone because communities are required to install additional safety measures. We have seen incidents within quiet zone areas because people, again, are just not paying attention, trying to race through the crossing before the train gets there. But we are seeing a reduction as far as incidents of highway railway crossings, yes.
Grade separation as a universal topic. In the passenger field, as the speeds increase beyond 79 up into 110 and even more, there's an understanding that grade separation works much better at the higher speeds for passenger rail. As I read the news from around the U.S. and updates, in the freight area, it seems as though many of the companies take on grade separation in their own unique way. For instance, if there's multiples in a city or something, they essentially go to the city and say, we're going to close these, and that's the way it is. When we get to outside of a city area or urban area, it seems like there's less and less interest in the freight railroads for grade separation. Is there any kind of concern in these areas for grade separation from the freight railroads, and is there some kind of a limit at which they would be more in favor of grade separations that would be somewhat compatible to the passenger railroad concern for grade separation?
As far as grade separations, a lot of it boils down to being able to install them based on funding, millions and millions of dollars. And getting back to your first comment about closing the crossings, obviously if we have a grade separation, we want to make sure that we close that roadway crossing. I've been in situations where they've left the railroad crossing below open and you've got this wonderful grade separation. The risk is still there when you have that grade crossing, at grade crossing. Grade separations, we work very closely, state DOTs, there's federal funding available, but as far as the rural areas, it's based on, the traffic volume, train volume, that particular location. A lot of partners have to come to the table to institute a grade separation. And it takes years and years to accomplish something like that. Working with the community right now in Wisconsin that they've proposed a grade separation 5 years ago, cannot come up with the funding. So, they're very safe, as we all know, but somebody has to pay for those wonderful structures.
Just a quick comment and a question. One of the first instances of quiet zones was on the Florida East Coast Railroad, which was a disaster. And in fact, the FRA came in and mandated that the FEC reinstitute blowing their horns. Do you know why that didn't work? And then my other comment was, could you comment about liability when you institute a quiet zone? Is there a transfer of that liability for a grade crossing incident between the railroad and the local community?
As far as the Florida East Coast study, we see, I should say FRA, the local municipality, railroads experienced an increase of incidents at railroad crossings. Again, if you're not going to implement safety measures at every public crossing, you take away that horn, your safety measure, again, you've got more exposure. The risk is out there. When we conduct the diagnostic reviews, we very well indicate safety measures for every public crossing. Community does not have to do that if the risk is acceptable to achieve a quiet zone. Getting over as far as liability, the regulation clearly states that we will let the courts decide. However, the community implements the quiet zone if they choose not to make safety improvements. They do have a little portion of that liability issue. And again, we have had some incidents at quiet zones, and I make that very clear to the communities that I work with, that if you choose to take away the horns and not put another safety measure at this particular location, you could be responsible for an incident. A sign that says no train horn, may be good enough, but again, when you've got that, when you take away the train horn, there's a 66.8% increase in risk. So you want to compensate, add something there to alert the motoring public and avoid an incident.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I actually have one more quick question as I come. A lot of discussion about the quiet zones and grade crossings, but then I looked at the fatalities and trespassers way beyond the grade crossing, and it seems like we don't have the same improvement on the trespasser side as we've had on the grade crossings. Do you see that at some point the attention is going to maybe shift a little bit more from the grade crossing towards investments on trying to avoid or reduce the number of trespasser fatalities?
We have worked with some high-profile communities to install fencing along, university corridors, or if it's a downtown area and we've got a huge trespass problem. Number one is get your law enforcement involved. Do some outreach, educate the folks, go into the school system. But trespassing, it's just so hard to combat. Again, people think that you can install fencing, but you put a chain link fence up, and I've been to communities where those little buggers, the kids will just cut a hole through the chain link fence, and there goes thousands of dollars of a safety improvement. But again, education and enforcement would be the ultimate start.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.